My parents laughed at me in front of everyone. They called my dreams a joke, a phase, a waste of time. I was the invisible child at their perfect dinner table, the one they mocked while their golden children shined. That night, I walked out with nothing but a sketchbook and a promise to myself. Years later, they invited me back. They wanted to show off one last time. They had no idea what was waiting in my purse. And when I pulled it out, the look on their faces was something I will never forget. They finally saw me. But by then, it was far too late. Sophia sat alone in her small, dimly lit apartment, the only sound the gentle hum of her laptop and the occasional drip from a leaky faucet in the kitchenette. Outside, the city of Los Angeles buzzed with its usual nighttime energy, but inside, the silence was heavy, thick with the ghosts of the past. She stared at the blinking cursor on a blank document, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. For years, she had kept this story locked away, a painful secret she carried like a stone in her chest. But tonight, she needed to let it out. She needed to tell the world what happened to the girl her parents had dismissed, the girl they had laughed at. She needed to tell the story of Sophia. My name is Sophia, and for the first 22 years of my life, I was the invisible child in my own family. Not invisible in the way that I was literally unseen, but in the way that my presence, my thoughts, and my dreams were utterly inconsequential. My parents, Richard and Brenda, were successful people. My father was a partner at a mid-sized law firm, a man who commanded rooms with his booming voice and sharp suits. My mother was a real estate agent who sold multi-million-dollar properties in the Hollywood Hills. A woman whose life was a curated Instagram feed of brunches, charity galas, and designer handbags. They were the golden couple, and they had two golden children, my older brother, Mark, and my older sister, Chloe. Mark was the spitting image of my father, with the same confident swagger and a natural talent for debate and business. He was groomed from birth to take over the world, or at least the law firm. Chloe was my mother's mini-me, beautiful, popular, and obsessed with appearances. She was a social media influencer before the term was even coined, always dressed in the latest trends and dating the most eligible young men in the city. And then there was me. I was the quiet one, the bookworm, the one who preferred the company of a sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils to a crowded party. While my father discussed legal precedents with Mark at the dinner table, and my mother critiqued Chloe's choice of lipstick, I would sit in a corner, drawing the way the light fell on a glass of water, or sketching the expressions on my family's faces, expressions that were never directed at me. They weren't cruel to me in an overt, movie villain way. There were no beatings, no locked doors. Their cruelty was far more insidious. It was a systematic, daily dismissal. It was a slow erosion of my very being. My passion was art. It was the only place I felt truly alive. When I drew, the world fell away. The lines and shadows on the paper were more real to me than the marble floors and imported furniture of my parents' Bel Air mansion. I would spend hours in my room, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with portraits, landscapes, and abstract designs. I saw beauty in the mundane the way a wrinkle creased an old man's face, the tangled weeds pushing through a crack in the pavement, the vibrant chaos of a downtown fruit market. This was my world, and I poured my soul into it. My parents, however, saw it as a hobby, a quirky phase I would eventually grow out of. To them, art wasn't a career. It wasn't a path to success. It was a frivolous pursuit, a waste of the expensive education they were begrudgingly providing. The memory I am about to share is the one that finally broke me, the one that severed the last thin, fraying thread of hope I had for my family's love and acceptance. It was a Sunday evening, and my mother had decided to host one of her infamous family dinners. It was an elaborate affair, a showcase of her culinary skills and her beautiful home. The dining table was a masterpiece of fine china, sparkling crystal, and a centerpiece of fresh flowers that probably cost more than a week's groceries for a normal family. The guests, as always, were my father's law partner, Mr. Harrison, and his wife, along with a few of my mother's wealthy realtor friends. It was a performance, and we were all actors in it. I was 17, a senior in high school. I was wearing a simple blue dress my mother had bought for me 2 years ago, one she deemed appropriate. I sat quietly, pushing my food around my plate, listening to the adults discuss stock portfolios and summer homes in Malibu. I felt a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach, I knew what was coming. The conversation always found its way to the children, and it did. Mr. Harrison, a kind-faced man with silver hair, turned to me. "So, Sophia, you're a senior this year. College applications are due soon. What are you thinking of studying?" Before I could even open my mouth, a wave of snickering rippled from the other end of the table. My brother Mark, now a junior at Stanford, leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face. "Oh, Uncle Mark," he said, mocking the term of endearment, "you don't want to get her started. She's going to be an artist." He said the word artist as if it were a disease. My mother let out a light, tinkling laugh, the kind she used at her cocktail parties. "Mark, don't tease. It's just a little hobby, isn't it, Sophia? She spends all her time in her room, drawing pictures." She turned to her friends. "She gets it from my side of the family, I think. Great Aunt Mildred used to paint terrible landscapes." The table chuckled. My face burned. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to explain that it wasn't just a hobby, that I had been accepted into a summer program at the Rhode Island School of Design, that my art teacher said I had a real gift. But the words died in my throat. My father, who had been swirling a glass of expensive red wine, joined in. "The problem, Harrison, is that she has no head for business, not like Mark here. Mark just closed a deal for his university's investment club. And Chloe, well, Chloe's got a head for branding. She's got 20,000 followers on Instagram. Now, what are you going to do with a drawing of a flower, Sophia? Frame it and put it on a shelf?" More laughter. This time it was louder. Chloe, beautiful and bored, rolled her eyes. "Dad, be nice. Maybe she can design my wedding invitations someday." Her friends giggled. My mother beamed, delighted that the spotlight was off her and on the amusing folly of her youngest child. Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable, giving me a small, sympathetic smile. But that only made it worse. Their pity was a confirmation of my family's verdict. I was the family's resident failure, the strange, quiet one with the useless hobby. I was a joke. I sat there, frozen, my hands clenched in my lap, my fingernails digging into my palms. I could feel the tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. I would not give them the satisfaction. I stared at my plate, at the perfectly arranged food I had no appetite for, and I let their words wash over me. Hobby, phase, flower drawings, wedding invitations. The dinner continued around me, a swirling vortex of conversation and laughter that I was not a part of. I was an island of silent shame in a sea of their self-congratulatory joy. That night, after the guests had left and my family had retreated to their respective wings of the house, I sat on my bed and looked at my latest sketch. It was a portrait of an old woman I had seen at the bus stop, her face a roadmap of a long and difficult life. There was more truth and beauty in the lines on her face than in everything my family owned. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. It was no longer just disappointment. It was a cold, clear resolve. I was not their joke. I was not their hobby, and I was going to prove it. The next day, I started making a plan. I knew I couldn't rely on them for college. My father had made it clear that he would only pay for a practical education, meaning business, law, or medicine. Art school was out of the question, so I would have to do it myself. I researched scholarships, grants, and student loans. I worked even harder on my portfolio, spending every spare moment perfecting my craft. I got a part-time job at a local bookstore, and every single dollar I earned went into a secret savings account my parents knew nothing about. When college acceptance letters started arriving, the pattern was predictable. I got into several good universities for standard liberal arts degrees. My parents barely glanced at them. But the letter I was waiting for, the one from the California Institute of the Arts, CalArts, one of the top art schools in the country, arrived in a thin envelope. I had been accepted with a partial scholarship based on my portfolio. It wasn't a full ride, but it was a start. It was a crack in the door. I sat my parents down in the living room one evening, my heart hammering against my ribs. I showed them the letter. I explained the scholarship. I pleaded with them to help me cover the rest, promising to pay them back, to work, to do anything. My father sighed, a long, theatrical sigh of pure exasperation. He looked at my mother, then back at me, holding the letter between two fingers as if it were something distasteful. "Sophia, we've been over this. This art school thing is a fantasy. You need to be realistic." Go to a state school, get a degree in marketing or communications. Something you can fall back on. But Dad, this is what I love, I said, my voice trembling. This is what I'm good at. My mother shook her head, a pitying smile on her lips. Honey, love doesn't pay the bills. You'll understand when you're older. We're just trying to protect you from a lifetime of disappointment. Protect me? They always said that. It was their favorite excuse for crushing my dreams. I looked at them, sitting there on their expensive sofa, in their perfect house, and I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting their own image of a perfect, successful family. And I, with my impractical dreams, was a flaw in that image. A stain they wanted to erase. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded, folded the letter carefully, and put it back in my pocket. Okay, I said, my voice flat. I understand. They looked relieved. The unpleasant conversation was over. They could go back to their comfortable lives. I walked out of the room and back upstairs, and I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that I was done asking for their permission. I was done seeking their approval. I enrolled in community college for my general education requirements, working 2 jobs to save every penny. I applied for every grant and scholarship I could find. 2 years later, I had enough credits and enough money saved. Combined with a new, larger scholarship I had won for a portfolio of cityscapes, to transfer to CalArts. I didn't tell them until the week before I was supposed to leave. I just packed my bags, my art supplies, and my sketchbooks, and I stood in the doorway of my room, looking back at the gilded cage I was escaping. I found my mother in her home office, scrolling through listings on her laptop. Mom, I said. She looked up, annoyed at the interruption. I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm transferring to CalArts. For a second, she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Then the disbelief was replaced by a flash of anger, and then, finally, by that same pitying smile. Oh, Sophia, don't be ridiculous. You can't afford that. And you'll just fail and have to come back with your tail between your legs. I have a scholarship. And savings, I'll be fine. My voice was steady. It felt strange, this newfound strength. She just shook her head and turned back to her computer. Fine, go, but don't come crying to us when it doesn't work out. We tried to warn you. My father's reaction when I found him in his study was similar. He barely looked up from his legal briefs. This is a mistake, Sophia. But it's your mistake to make. Don't expect us to bail you out. And that was it. No hug. No, I'm proud of you for following your dream. No, I'll miss you. Just a cold, dismissive indifference. I walked out of that house, and I didn't look back. The first few years at CalArts were a blur of exhaustion and exhilaration. I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I took on freelance graphic design projects for local businesses, illustrated children's books for self-published authors, and sold my own small sketches and paintings at weekend markets in Santa Clarita and downtown LA. Every cent I earned went back into my education and my art. I lived in a tiny, cockroach-infested apartment in a questionable part of town, surviving on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. But I was happy. I was learning. I was creating. I was alive. My focus shifted from traditional drawing to digital art and character design. I fell in love with the process of creating entire worlds and the characters that lived in them. I was good at it, really good. My professors noticed, and I started getting attention for my unique style, a blend of gritty realism and whimsical fantasy. My characters had souls. You could see their stories in their eyes. During my senior year, I had to create a final portfolio project, a piece of work that would define me as an artist. I poured everything I had into it. I created a series of digital paintings depicting a dystopian future where nature had reclaimed a decaying city, and the last survivors were not humans, but the animals, who now walked on 2 legs and spoke in human tongues. The central character was a young fox, a scavenger and a dreamer, who was ostracized by the other animals for her strange habit of collecting scraps of the old human world's shiny pieces of metal, colorful glass, and discarded paper with strange markings. She was called an oddity, a dreamer, a waste of time. She was me. I called the series Vox Populi, the voice of the people. It was my way of giving a voice to all the outsiders, the misfits, the ones who were told their dreams were worthless. Each painting told a piece of her story. In one, she was alone in a crumbling library, surrounded by books she couldn't read but treasured anyway. In another, she was being chased by a pack of mocking coyotes, their teeth bared in cruel laughter. In the final piece, she stood on a hilltop at dawn, the ruined city spread out below her. A single, tarnished silver spoon held in her paw like a scepter, her eyes filled not with despair, but with a quiet, unshakable hope. My professors were blown away. They encouraged me to enter it into a competition, the annual Digital Arts Spectrum Scholarship, a prestigious award that came with a $50,000 grant and representation from a top talent agency in LA. I submitted my portfolio, a collection of the 10 best pieces from my Vox Populi series, and then I waited. The day the email came, I was in my apartment trying to fix my ancient, sputtering air conditioner with a butter knife. My phone buzzed. It was my academic advisor. I answered, my heart in my throat. Sophia, her voice was crackling with excitement. "Sit down. Did you check your email?" "No, I've been trying to fix this damn AC," I said, my hand shaking as I wiped sweat from my forehead. "Well, stop. You won the Spectrum Scholarship. And more importantly, a recruiter from a major animation studio, Pixar, was on the judging panel. They want to meet with you. They loved your work. They specifically mentioned the character of the fox. They said she was unforgettable." I sank onto my rickety bed, the butter knife clattering to the floor. I didn't cry. I just sat there in the stifling heat and felt a wave of emotion so powerful it was almost physical. It wasn't just joy or relief. It was validation. It was the universe, or whatever force governs such things, telling me that my family was wrong, that my passion was not a hobby, that my dreams were not a joke, that the quiet girl, the one they laughed at, had created something unforgettable. The meeting was surreal. I walked into the sprawling, creatively chaotic campus of Pixar Animation Studios in Emeryville, a place I had dreamed of since I was a child. I met with a senior creative director, a woman named Alina, whose own work I had admired for years. We talked for 2 hours about my art, my process, my characters. She didn't see a naive girl with a hobby. She saw a professional. She saw a potential colleague. A week later, they offered me a job as a junior character designer. I was 22 years old, and my starting salary was $120,000 a year. My first year at Pixar was a masterclass in creativity. I was surrounded by the most brilliant, passionate people in the world. I learned more in those 12 months than in 4 years of college. My work on a small, side project, a concept for a new animated short about a lonely young girl who finds a friend in a misunderstood creature from a forgotten forest, caught the attention of the studio heads. They asked me to develop it into a full feature film. I was given my own team, my own budget. I was, at 23, one of the youngest lead character designers in the studio's history. The film, which we called The Whispering Woods, was a labor of love. The lonely girl in the story was me. The misunderstood creature, with its big, sad eyes and a heart full of unspoken dreams, was my art, the part of me my family had tried to silence. We spent 3 years bringing it to life. There were late nights and early mornings, moments of doubt and bursts of inspiration. I designed every character, from the brave little girl named Lily to the gentle, furry creature called Grom, and all the quirky animals of the Whispering Woods. I drew from my own pain, my own loneliness, and my own eventual triumph. Every stroke of my digital brush was a small act of defiance, a declaration that I existed and that my story mattered. The film was released 3 years after I started. I was 26 years old. The premiere was held at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood. I walked the red carpet in a simple gown, smiling for pictures, but inside I was trembling. My parents weren't there. My brother and sister weren't there. But my team was there, my friends, my colleagues, the family I had chosen for myself. The Whispering Woods was a critical and commercial phenomenon. It grossed over $700 million worldwide. It won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. And my name, Sophia, the girl they had mocked for drawing flowers, was listed in the credits as the lead character designer. My name was on that paycheck, and on every subsequent paycheck for the film's royalties and residuals. The characters I had created, born from the pain of that family dinner, were now loved by millions of children around the world. I received letters from kids who said Lily and Grom helped them feel less alone. I received emails from parents who said the film taught their children to be kind to those who are different. My art, the thing my family called a worthless hobby, was touching lives in ways they could never imagine. And that brings me back to the family dinner. I hadn't spoken to my parents in 9 years. I hadn't seen them at all. I knew they were aware of my success, in a vague way. The Whispering Woods was everywhere, and my name was attached to it. You couldn't walk into a store without seeing merchandise featuring Lily and Grom. You couldn't turn on the television without seeing a commercial for the film or its upcoming sequel. My face had been in magazines, my interviews had been on YouTube, my story had been told in countless articles about the rising young talents in animation. They would have had to live under a rock not to know, and I knew about them. My brother Mark, after a promising start, had been passed over for partner at my father's firm. He had made some bad investments, gotten involved in a risky real estate deal that went south, and was now drowning in debt. His wife had divorced him, taking the kids and most of what little he had left. He was living in a small apartment in the valley, working as a mid-level associate at a firm a fraction of the size of my father's old one. His confident swagger long gone. My sister Chloe, her Instagram fame fading as she aged out of the young influencer demographic, had tried to pivot to lifestyle blogging, then to fitness coaching, then to selling discount beauty products through multi-level marketing schemes. Nothing stuck. She had married a man who seemed nice enough at first, but turned out to be just as shallow and image-obsessed as she was. They were always on the verge of splitting up, always posting fake happy pictures to hide the misery underneath. Her follower count had dropped to a few thousand, mostly bots and old high school acquaintances who kept her around for the drama. My father's law firm had merged with a larger corporation, and he had been quietly pushed out, his old school ways and expensive tastes no longer valued in the new, leaner organization. He had tried to start his own consultancy, but without the backing of the firm, without the prestigious letterhead, the clients didn't come. My mother's real estate business had suffered in the shifting market. The days of multi-million-dollar Hollywood Hills sales were over. They had to sell the Bel Air mansion, the symbol of everything they had achieved, and downsize to a smaller, but still very nice, house in Sherman Oaks. But nice wasn't enough for them. Nice was failure. I knew all of this because, despite everything, a small, masochistic part of me had kept tabs on them through social media and old family connections. I told myself it was to protect myself, to know when to avoid certain places. But deep down, I think it was a way of measuring my own worth against their declining fortunes, a petty but human need to feel that the scales had finally balanced. I'm not proud of it, but it's the truth. When you've been made to feel small for so long, there's a certain dark satisfaction in watching those who made you feel that way become small themselves. The invitation came as a shock. It was a formal, handwritten note from my mother, delivered to my apartment in Los Angeles. I was 28 years old, and I had just finished the design work on my second feature film, a sequel to The Whispering Woods that was already generating Oscar buzz. I was tired, happy, and content with my life. I had a small but beautiful home in the hills, a circle of true friends, and a career that fulfilled me in ways I never thought possible. I didn't need anything from my family. I didn't want anything from them, but the invitation made my heart skip a beat. Dearest Sophia, it read in her elegant, looping script, "It has been far too long. We are having a small, intimate family dinner to celebrate your father's retirement. We would be so happy if you could join us. It would mean the world to us to have our whole family together again. Please come. Sunday, 7 p.m. Love, Mom and Dad." I stared at the card for a long time. Part of me wanted to throw it in the trash. Part of me wanted to frame it as a relic of their hypocrisy. But a larger, more complicated part of me was curious. I wanted to see them. I wanted to see the faces of the people who had laughed at me, who had told me I would fail, now that the world had told them they were wrong. I wanted to see if they had changed, if they felt any remorse. I know it wasn't a noble impulse. It was human. It was the vindication of the invisible child. I decided to go. I spent the week leading up to the dinner in a strange state of anticipation. I thought about what I would say, how I would act. I considered bringing a date, someone to shield me from the awkwardness, but decided against it. This was something I had to face alone. I thought about dressing down, trying not to seem like I was flaunting my success. But then I got angry at myself for even thinking that way. Why should I hide who I had become? Why should I dim my light to make them comfortable? They had never dimmed theirs for me. That Sunday evening, I drove to their new house in Sherman Oaks. It was a nice house, a Spanish-style villa with a red tile roof and a manicured lawn, but a far cry from the Bel Air mansion. It felt smaller, less grand, more ordinary. I pulled up in my car, a sleek black Audi, a far cry from the beat-up Honda I had driven in college. I had thought about what to wear for a long time. I didn't want to show up in designer clothes, trying too hard to prove my success. But I also didn't want to look like the dowdy, invisible girl they remembered. I settled on a simple, elegant black dress, a classic design that whispered sophistication rather than shouting it. I wore a single piece of jewelry, a delicate silver necklace with a small, stylized fox pendant I had designed myself. It was my personal symbol, my reminder of where I came from, and a quiet nod to the character who had changed my life. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. My mother answered. She looked older. The perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the new lines around her eyes and mouth. Her hair, once a perfect blonde, was now a duller shade with gray roots peeking through. Her smile was a little too wide, a little too bright, the smile of someone trying too hard to make a good impression. "Sophia, oh my goodness, look at you. Come in, come in." She air-kissed my cheeks, a gesture so familiar and yet so hollow. I stepped inside. The house was decorated in a style that was trying very hard to be the old one, but it felt forced, like a stage set. The furniture was expensive but generic, the art on the walls was mass-produced, the whole place lacked the carefully curated elegance of the Bel Air mansion. It was a house trying to look rich, not a rich person's house. My father was in the living room, nursing a glass of scotch. He stood up when I entered, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. He looked diminished, his once commanding presence shrunk into a slightly stooped frame. His suit, clearly an expensive one, hung loosely on him, as if he had lost weight and hadn't bothered to have it tailored. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, looked tired and defeated. "Sophia," he said, his voice lacking its old boom. "You came." "I did," I said simply. My brother Mark was there, sitting on the couch, looking paunchy and defeated. His hair was thinning, his shirt was wrinkled, and there was a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He gave me a weak, awkward nod. "Hey, Sophia." Chloe was on her phone, barely glancing up. "Oh, hey, Sophia," she mumbled. Her once glossy hair looked dull, and her designer outfit seemed a season out of date. Her husband, a bland-looking man I had never met, hovered awkwardly behind her, clutching a beer and looking uncomfortable. The dinner was a strange, stilted affair. The conversation was forced, full of awkward pauses and overly bright attempts at normalcy. They asked me polite, surface-level questions about my job in animation. They didn't mention my film by name. They didn't mention the Oscar. They treated it as if I had a normal, respectable but unremarkable office job. My mother talked at length about her new garden club. My father complained about the stock market and the ingratitude of his former partners. Mark and Chloe bickered quietly about money, about who owed whom for this or that. The old dynamic was gone. The golden children had tarnished, and the joke was no longer funny. I played along, answering their questions with polite monosyllables, offering nothing of myself. I watched them, these people who had once loomed so large in my life, and I felt a strange sense of detachment. They were strangers to me. The power they once held over me was gone. I felt no anger, no sadness, no longing. Just a calm, clear emptiness. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. Then, as the main course was being cleared away, my mother, with a nervous glance at my father, decided to address the elephant in the room. "So, Sophia," she began, her voice overly sweet, "we've been reading so much about your success. It's wonderful. We're so proud of you." Proud. The word felt like a slap. Where was this pride when I was 17? Where was it when I was living in a roach-infested apartment, eating ramen, and working myself to the bone? Where was it when I needed just a fraction of their belief to keep going? My father cleared his throat, a pale imitation of his old authoritative self. "Yes, well, we always knew you had it in you. We just wanted you to have a backup plan, that's all. We were just being practical." The old Sophia, the one who craved their approval, might have accepted this pathetic attempt at rewriting history. But that Sophia was long gone. This new Sophia, the one who had built a career from nothing but talent and sheer force of will, felt a cold anger rise within her. They were trying to take credit for my success. They were trying to whitewash their own cruelty. They were trying to rewrite the story so that they were the concerned, loving parents instead of the dismissive, mocking strangers they had been. I didn't say anything. I just smiled a small, non-committal smile. The moment passed, and the awkward conversation resumed. After dessert, a cloyingly sweet store-bought pie that my mother served with forced cheerfulness, she insisted we move to the living room for coffee. As we were settling in, my father, trying to find some common ground, some way to appear relevant, mentioned a new investment he was considering. "It's in some tech startup," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Entertainment technology. They're doing something with, I don't know, streaming or something. Mark's looking into it for me." He looked over at my brother, who nodded weakly. "Yeah, it's a small company. They've got some interesting patents, but they're pre-revenue. High risk, potentially high reward. The founder is a young guy, really passionate. He claims the whole concept came to him from an old art project he saw years ago, said it inspired him to go into animation tech." My mother, trying to include me, turned and asked, "Sophia, dear, do you know anything about that world? With all your movie stuff?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "A little," I said, my voice calm. "My company actually works with a lot of tech firms for distribution and streaming platforms. We're always looking at new tools for animation and rendering." My father perked up, a flicker of his old interest in his eyes. "Oh, really? Which ones? Maybe you've heard of this one. It's called Vox Populi Innovations." "Mark, what was the name again?" My blood ran cold, then hot. Vox Populi, the name of my college portfolio project. The series that had launched my career. It was a unique name, one I had coined myself from the Latin for voice of the people, a perfect fit for my characters who spoke for a voiceless world. I own the trademark. I own the intellectual property for the characters and the world. I had registered it all years ago, on the advice of my agent, to protect my work from exactly this kind of thing. Mark confirmed it. "Yeah, Vox Populi Innovations. They're a small startup based in San Francisco. Got some really interesting animation software in development, something about AI-assisted character design. They're looking for investors. The founder, a guy named David Chen, says the whole concept was born from a series of paintings he saw at a competition years ago. Said they changed his life. He's been building the company around that inspiration ever since." I set my coffee cup down, very carefully, on the saucer. The clink was the only sound in the suddenly silent room. I looked from my father's hopeful face to my brother's anxious one, and then to my mother's curious expression. Chloe was even off her phone, sensing a shift in the air. "Vox Populi," I repeated, the name hanging in the air between us. "That's an interesting name." My father nodded eagerly. "Yes, isn't it? Very artistic. Mark thinks it could be the next big thing. We're thinking of putting in a substantial amount. It could be our way back, to where we were." The founder, inspired by an old college art project, David Chen, the name didn't ring a bell, but the story did. My Vox Populi series had been shown at several competitions. Anyone could have seen it. Anyone could have been inspired by it. But building a company around it, using the name, the concept, without my permission, that was something else entirely. The pieces were clicking into place in my mind with a terrifying clarity. My work, my characters, my vision, someone was building a company around it. And my family, the very people who had mocked that vision, were now trying to invest in its stolen shell. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. I reached into my purse, my hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. I pulled out my wallet, a simple, worn leather one I'd had for years. From it, I extracted a small, folded piece of paper. It was an old pay stub, one of the first I had received from Pixar, from before the movie was even released. I had kept it as a souvenir, a tangible reminder of the moment my life changed. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately. Everyone's eyes were on me. My mother's smile had frozen on her face. My father looked confused. Mark was leaning forward, his brow furrowed. Chloe's mouth was slightly open. I held up the pay stub, not waving it, just presenting it calmly. On it, in clear black print, was the letterhead of Pixar Animation Studios, and below that my name, Sophia R. Vance. And below my name, the payee line. You were asking about my movie stuff, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the stunned silence. You wanted to know if I knew anything about that world. I paused, letting the tension build. I do. And I know something about Vox Populi innovations, too. I turned the pay stub so they could see it more clearly, my finger pointing not at my name, but at the memo line in the corner. For internal accounting purposes, they sometimes noted the project a payment was for. On this particular stub, from the early days of development, it read, Project Vox Initial Concept. You see this? I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. Project Vox. It was the internal code name for what became the Whispering Woods. The characters, the world, the entire visual language, it was all based on my college thesis project. A project I called Vox Populi. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on their expensive, but now tacky-looking rug. My father's face went pale, then red. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Mark stared, his jaw slack, the color draining from his face as the realization hit him. Chloe's eyes were wide, her phone forgotten in her lap. That startup you want to invest in, I continued, my voice dripping with a cold, calm fury, is built on my stolen intellectual property. Someone, probably someone who saw my portfolio at a competition years ago, is trying to cash in on my work. My work, the work you called a hobby, the work you laughed at over dinner. The work you told me was a waste of time. I stood up, tucking the pay stub back into my wallet and the wallet back into my purse. I looked at each of them in turn, letting my gaze linger. I saw the shame in my father's eyes, a deep, gut-wrenching shame that made him look 20 years older. I saw the horror in my mother's, the realization that her perfect narrative, the one where she was a concerned parent, was crumbling to dust. I saw the panic in Mark's, the understanding that his sure-thing investment, his last chance to prove himself, was a house of cards built on his little sister's discarded dreams. I saw the emptiness in Chloe's, the final confirmation that she had backed the wrong horse, that the invisible sister was the only one who had truly won. So, I said, my voice carrying a terrible finality, you wanted to know about my world. There it is. It's a world where the things you dismissed as worthless are now worth millions. It's a world where the girl you laughed at has her name on the paycheck that could buy and sell this house 10 times over. And it's a world where your next, pathetic attempt to climb back to the top is about to collapse because you tried to ride the coattails of my little hobby. I walked towards the door. My mother finally found her voice, a choked, desperate whisper. Sophia, wait, please, we didn't know, we're so sorry, we're family. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I turned back one last time. I looked at the four of them, frozen in their tableau of shock and regret. I felt no pity. I felt no love. I felt nothing but a profound, cleansing emptiness. The invisible child was not only seen. She was the only thing worth seeing. And she was leaving. Family? I echoed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. You lost the right to call me family the night you mocked me at this very table, in front of your friends. That was the night I stopped being your daughter and started being my own creation. And look what I created. I gestured vaguely around their diminished home. Meanwhile, look what you created. I opened the door. The cool night air rushed in, smelling of jasmine and freedom. I stepped through it, out of their gilded cage, and into my own life. Behind me, the silence was broken only by the soft, final click of the door closing. I walked to my car, my footsteps steady on the paved driveway. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My story wasn't about them anymore. It was about the girl who drew flowers and was told she would never bloom. It was about the woman who cultivated an entire forest. As I drove away, the lights of Lowe's angels blurring into a beautiful, sprawling canvas before me, I knew one thing for certain. The best revenge wasn't the look on their faces or the collapse of their foolish investment. The best revenge was the life I had built, a life so full of purpose and passion that their mockery was now just a faint, distant echo, a forgotten whisper from a past that no longer had any power over me. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Within a week, Vox Populi Innovations received a cease and desist letter, along with notice of a federal lawsuit for intellectual property theft. David Chen, the founder, turned out to be a former classmate from CalArts who had seen my portfolio and decided to build a career on my ideas. The company folded within months. My father and brother lost the money they had invested, money they couldn't afford to lose. It was the final blow to their already crumbling finances. Mark filed for bankruptcy shortly after. My parents had to sell the Sherman Oaks house and move into a small condo in a less desirable part of the valley. Chloe's marriage finally ended, and she moved back in with them, the three of them sharing a space smaller than my childhood bedroom. I heard all of this through the grapevine, through old family friends who reached out to me, hoping for a reaction. I gave them none. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, not regret, just a quiet, peaceful nothing. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. Years passed. My career flourished. I designed characters for half a dozen more films, won another Oscar, started my own production company. I fell in love, married a wonderful man named James, a screenwriter I met on a project, and we had two beautiful children. We bought a house in the hills, a real home, filled with love and laughter and art. My children's rooms were covered in my sketches, their shelves filled with books I had illustrated, their nights filled with stories I had created. They would never know the pain of being dismissed, of being told their dreams were worthless. I made sure of that. One day, about 15 years after that final family dinner, I received a letter. It was from my mother. The handwriting was shaky, the paper cheap. She wrote that my father had passed away. A heart attack, she said. She wrote that he had never gotten over that night, that he had wanted to reach out so many times, but hadn't known how. She wrote that she was alone now, that Mark had moved to another state, that Chloe was in and out of rehab, that she had no one. She asked if I could find it in my heart to see her, just once, before she too was gone. I held the letter for a long time. James found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at it. He put his hand on my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I told him I was, and I was. The anger was gone. The pain was gone. All that was left was a faint, distant memory of a girl who had once been hurt by people who should have loved her. I didn't go. I wrote back, a short, simple letter. I told her I wished her well, that I hoped she found peace. I told her that I had built a good life, a happy life, and that I wished the same for her. I told her that I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to let go of the last thread that bound me to that pain. I signed it, Sophia, and that was all. I never heard from her again. She died a few years later, alone in that small condo. Mark didn't come to the funeral. Chloe was in no condition to. I didn't go either. I said a quiet goodbye in my own way, in my studio, surrounded by my characters, my creations, my proof that I had existed and mattered long before they ever acknowledged it. My name is Sophia. I am a wife, a mother, an artist, a storyteller. I am the creator of worlds and the voice of characters who have touched millions of lives. I am the girl my parents mocked at a family dinner, and I am the woman who found her name on her own paycheck, a paycheck that funded a life they could only dream of. And that is my story. Not a story of revenge, really, but a story of survival. A story of finding light in the darkness, of believing in yourself when no one else will, of turning pain into art and art into a life worth living. The invisible child is invisible no more. She is seen, not just by the world, but by herself. And in the end, that is the only thing that ever really mattered.